talking about, once again, our good old mate, Patrick Bet David, right? Like yes, we talk a lot about his stuff because I consume a lot of his stuff. I believe he has great content, great businessman, has great leadership. He recently did an interview with these authors from the Blue Ocean Strategy. I don't know if you know the Blue Ocean Strategy, but the Blue Ocean Strategy pretty much, says that there's blue ocean and there's red ocean. The red ocean is where all the sharks are feeding at the moment, and they're all, having a feeding frenzy and everything like that. And the whole point of this is that that's then red because that's where all the sharks are feeding frenzy, and so there's blood in the water, right? So that's where it's. You don't want to swim in the red ocean, right? You want to find blue ocean where it's clear, there's nothing else out there, and that's their theory in business is trying to find the blue ocean of where there's some space in your industry, kind of like specializing in a niche that's unique, like we teach all our businesses all the time that how to do that is find a niche and identify your unique selling proposition and how you can differentiate yourself from the market and swim in blue ocean rather than red ocean. So Patrick Bet David interviewed the authors of that book, and I actually go and check it out as we always talk about. The links are in description, so go and check them out. It's actually a pretty good interview because they start talking about ESG, this ESG score, right? And it's this new wave, which I've been trying to find an excuse to speak to Dr. Rod about this with his governance experience and wisdom. But I actually thought, on a side note, watch this interview because you can tell Patrick doesn't actually agree with a lot of the things that they say, and his response to them, very mature, very encouraging, very supportive, but kind of emphasized that he didn't agree, but he didn't fight them on it. I think that's a going in line with our theme about the leadership fight is the fight doesn't have to be nasty. You don't have to get into name calling or yelling and screaming. And I think there's a very reasonable and mature way of fighting against something that you don't believe in. Now, that being said, what they're talking about is ESG. And ESG is now kind of this next battle that business owners and business leaders or big corporations are facing, but smaller and smaller businesses are soon going to have to going to be impacted by this. First of all, Dr. Rod, what is ESG?
Well, it's 3 letters. They talk about equity. The S can mean different things to different people. For some, it's social objectives. For others, it's sustainability in one guise or another. And G is governance.
Yeah.
So it really is about broadening the focus of businesses to encompass not only the bottom line that we call profit, but some other bottom lines as well that involve social objectives and environmental objectives in particular. Did I say E was for equity? It's environmental, social, and normally it's environmental, social, and governance. Sorry,
because
it depends a bit on who you read and who you listen to.
But that's in the DEI is the
DEI.
Equity.
DEI is diversity, inclusion, diversity, inclusion, and equity. Yeah.
DIE. Okay. Yes.
Well, they don't call it DIE.
No.
Although, ironically, I think maybe that is a bit prophetic. They call it DEI.
Okay, makes sense.
Anyway, yes. That just shows my bias there. But the point behind it, it's quite a good one. Look, the very, very strong focus on profit is a fairly recent phenomenon. It really emerged about the middle of the 20th century.
Yeah.
And it was prompted by economic analysis, which essentially said that the overall welfare of a society is best addressed by business when it maximizes its profit, when it makes as much profit as it possibly can. And there are other institutions like government and the family and the local community and so on that are better equipped to address, say, the social side of things. But prior to the 1950s, there was quite a debate within the management literature about what were the proper objectives of business, and it was generally agreed that it wasn't just profit. There were other things that mattered as well, particularly in the social arena. And the environmental stuff really didn't come to the fore probably until the early 1980s.
Because the other thing that I remember learning when I studied governance at university was CSR, corporate social responsibility. How long has that been around for?
Well, that really became, I guess, popularised in the early 1980s and then into the 21st century. A lot of businesses have actually set up CSR divisions or a CSR executive within their structures. A corporate social responsibility was built around the idea that a business, particularly a public company with limited liability and certain legal protections, actually has what we call a social license to operate. And therefore, it has a responsibility not just to make a profit for the shareholders, but also to contribute positively to society in general, the neighbourhood in which the firm operates, the nation, and that would include things like caring for the environment. And look, I don't think there'd be too many people who would disagree with that.
Is this ESG now just kind of an evolution of that CSR?
Well, ESG plus DEI, I guess, are the evolution of CSR. And I think the point that Bette Davis was making was that the pendulum has swung too far.
Yes.
And that businesses are really being forced to sacrifice a good deal of profit, maybe even go out of business because of the pressure that comes upon them to address issues other than profit. Some of the very large investment firms like BlackRock, Vanguard and a few others, they own so many shares in many companies that they're able to influence board decisions. And the consequences for them of an individual firm losing profitability because it's adopting these policies, that's relatively small, but it can have a massive effect on the individual business in which these organisations invest. In Australia, we have very large, what we call superannuation funds that are effectively managed by unions, and that ends up giving the unions a significant influence on the boards of public companies. And the unions themselves don't necessarily have a strong interest in profit, and they can drive boards to make decisions that ultimately are not good for those businesses. And I think that's the issue that Bette Davis was raising here. It's gone too far.
Yeah, because it seems like it's sorry for the gross metaphor, but it seems incestuous a little bit, because it's sort of like what they're saying is it's these investment companies or investment firms that are saying, no, you must have a good ESG score. And then it's this other company that then trains these companies how to do ESG scores, but those companies are owned by those investment companies. And at the moment, it seems like this ESG score only seems to be just churning money in this kind of upper echelon.
Look, there's that as well. I mean, that all happened with CSR too. The big advisory firms and so on, they see some blue ocean,
Hmm.
and they get involved, and then of course if you can get governments to legislate, that creates a captive market. And so what's happened is it's all become very, very political, and it has been caught up in these modern critical race theory approaches and so on, that are a modern variation on Marxism.
Yes.
So we create groups of people who are oppressed and groups of people who are oppressors, and we want to get representation of the oppressed on the boards and all sorts of things. And I don't think that's how it's all meant to work,
Yeah,
frankly.
so let's delve into that a little bit more, because yeah, we're talking about ESG at the core of it, and like DEI and stuff like that. At the core, they're saying that there has to be the equal number of people employed, and we need to be ticking all the boxes of our that we're addressing all the minorities and all that sort of stuff, which then curtails away from the idea that me as a business owner, me as a business leader, I should be hiring the best person for the job. Now it's not choosing the best person for the job. It's now choosing, well, now I've got to choose one of each color, literally kind of thing, to then meet my quotas, not necessarily needing an actual outcome.
Look, yeah, it's a very blunt instrument to obtain desired social outcomes, because I mean, ultimately, if it goes much too far, it's going to impair society's capacity to meet the needs and the desires of its members, because it's just going to make it impossible for businesses to become profitable. Now, I think because I deal with numbers a fair bit, it's particularly problematic for smaller institutions.
Yes.
You see, human beings can't be divided. You can't employ half a human being. So, if you've somehow got to demonstrate that, say, your workforce or your board is representative on the basis of ethnicity, gender, or whatever, if you're small, it's going to be extremely difficult to do, because human beings themselves are indivisible.
And you may only be hiring 2 staff members.
Well, that's right.
Like,
And now, and what you would expect to observe within very large firms, proportions in employment that roughly coincide with proportions in the population overall. Yes. Boards are a different matter, because boards would seldom have more than 12 to 15 people on them, and most boards are going to be smaller than that. Yeah. So it's pretty hard to meet those quotas in any case.
So most people watching this would be leaders of small businesses, or small small organizations, or they may be politicians, or whatever arena they're in, maybe not in that big corporate space that we were talking about. How does this, like, I know it's only really affecting the big ones, like as far as investment at the moment. However, what should like, are there warning signs? Is it coming for us? Like, when should we expect, as small business owners, this be affecting us?
Oh, look, I think that's where things are headed. There's no doubt about that. So, let's say in the context of Australia, public companies, including charities, which are public companies limited by guarantee and are not for profit, it is likely that there will be expectations, at least if not regulations, that require boards to, have representation, not just on the basis of gender or race. I was at some board training yesterday on disability inclusion.
Yes.
And I think one of the issues here is that people think there's got to be representation from across the board on say boards or in terms of employment, but a board can be aware of and well educated about many, many different issues without necessarily having representation on the board. And indeed it has to, because most boards are not big enough to cover all areas, and so they need to seek expert input. Now, look, in relation to things like gender, I would argue that you're mad if you don't have both men and women on your board, because God didn't make us exactly the same. And my observation over many, many years is that we end up with better decisions when both men and women are making those decisions. Now, so forget about quotas. I don't like quotas. We had a discussion about using race as a basis for entry into universities just last week. And I know I surprised you a little bit when I said, in my own experience as an academic, there is a place, for reserving some places within universities for people who, for one reason or another, are disadvantaged. Now, I did also make the point, of course, that race is a very rough and ready shorthand way of encapsulating a whole range of disadvantage, and that my preference is not to do it based on race, but on the disadvantages.
Yes.
And we've got to be so careful we don't put people into categories, because it makes it difficult for them then to get out of those categories. And of course, Tucker Carlson, in that interview that we were talking about a little earlier, he addresses this issue, I think, in a very wise manner, and would recommend that those who are watching this podcast actually go and watch that interview in full, because I think he showed a lot of wisdom in this area, as in many, many, many others. So I don't know how clear I'm making myself, but I'm wary of any regulation, requirement that stipulates specific proportions of representation on any basis. I have no issue with advocacy. It concerns me that, say, a bank places a high weighting on an ESG score, which is motivated primarily by political reasons in the first place, because I think ultimately that bank's own profitability is likely to suffer, and therefore so too will the shareholders. And you've got to remember, a lot of the shareholders in banks and other financial institutions, and indeed in companies generally, they're just mums, what we call mums and dads.
Yes.
They're not wealthy people. They're saving for their retirement, or they're saving for the education of their children, or they're saving to buy a house of their own, or whatever. And one of the negative effects of these kinds of approaches is, as profitability is reduced generally throughout the economy, people who are trying to get by without relying on government handouts are going to find it harder and harder.
Yeah, it's a real challenge, and it is a fight. Like we as business leaders need to be aware that this is coming, but we shouldn't be afraid of it. And like Dr. Rod shared, is we shouldn't just be focused on the ESG score or DEI as a quota, but there is wisdom as leaders to make sure that we have some diversity. We shouldn't just be surrounded by a bunch of yes men. We shouldn't be surrounded by a bunch of people that are identical to us, because if they're identical to us, that we're not going to grow. We're not going to learn anything. We're not going to find new ways or new things to do. So make sure, as you're doing something, no matter how big or small your business is, try to surround yourself with different voices, different types of people from different perspectives, people that can see things differently than you, people with different skill sets, different experiences, so that you can actually learn and grow and be able to see the maximum opportunities rather than having your blinkers on and being blinded to opportunities that are around you. Hey, you've just watched an excerpt from the On the Cube with Leadership podcast. If you've liked that, give it a thumbs up. If you've got any thoughts of how it challenged or helped your leadership, put a comment below, and we'd be honored if you would consider subscribing for more leadership content. Also, make sure you check out the playlist for more episodes like this.